Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us, everyone. This is our fourth episode of this webinar series on changing political economies in large river basins. Over the last couple of weeks and months, we've been going through different continents and basins, exploring what kinds of drivers there are that shape the way in which we value water resources, or in many cases, undervalue water resources. And now for this episode, I'm delighted to say that we're moving on to Southern Africa. And we have two fantastic guest speakers, Inga and Maria. Inga is coming from IMI, South Africa, but she's had lots of experience working at the Water Commission as well. And Maria joining us from the Department of Water Affairs. And she's got 20 years of experience on the ground looking at integrated water resources management, as well as transboundary water management as well. So between them, I think it's going to be a fantastic occasion to think about the ways in which regionalism works or not in the case of Southern Africa, and what kinds of values, what kind of questions around water and water allocation we start to see, noting that it's a very rich region of historical legacies, of various path dependencies as a result of infrastructure development, agricultural trajectories, developments of water institutions within countries, across countries, transboundary institutions as well. So I'm really looking forward to hearing their views on the opportunities and limitations of regionalism, as well as your thoughts. We have plenty of time for questions, plenty of times for comments from the audience. So please do keep your thinking caps on and make sure you provide your thoughts, questions, and your own experiences as well. I am just looking at the list, and I'm seeing that many of you are based in the region and have plenty of experience to share. So I'm really looking forward to the stories that you might have. For those of you who've not met me before, my name is Naho Miromachi. I work as a reader at the Department of Geography at King's College London, and I co-host this webinar series. And Alan is here with me today. Alan, you want to say a couple of words?
Yeah, thanks, Naho. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining, and thanks to our two speakers for joining as well. As Naho says, this is really quite an informal, discursive environment. So we're trying to encourage exploration of ideas. The theme today, regionalism, is such an important topic in many parts of the world, particularly in Southern Africa in relation to water resources management, because there's a good 2 decades of work, particularly on well, through SADC particularly, but also other mechanisms to really develop regional perspectives on water resource management. So there's a real wellspring of experience to examine, and I'm sure we'll get into that with our two speakers. So do encourage everyone to pop in questions to the chat, to even put your hand up if you have an intervention, and let's get it going and make it really lively. Thanks. Now back to you.
All right, well then, without further ado, I will invite Inga first to provide us with her initial comments and thoughts for roughly about 7-8 minutes, and then we'll swiftly move on to Maria. She will also do the same, and then we'll open the floor to all of us. So Inga, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Naho and Ellen, for inviting me, and good morning, good afternoon, evening, everyone, wherever you are around the world. I'm delighted to be here today. I was asked to keep this light, so there's no presentation, there's no PowerPoint, but instead what I'd like to do is just share a few insights on this notion, as Ellen said, of regionalism in the Southern African context, which is where I live and work, and in many ways was brought up, born and bred in the Southern African water sector. And also, just share a little bit of insights on what regionalism means and its implications for transboundary water management in Southern Africa. Now, maybe just to start us off, and how's this for a conversation starter? Perhaps completely the opposite of light, but maybe just to start by saying regionalism in Southern Africa has been sucked into a leadership vacuum. I'll say that again, regionalism in Southern Africa has been sucked into a leadership vacuum. Many of you watching the news these past few days or weeks have heard about the civil unrest in Eswatini. It's been a series of ongoing protests against the monarchy and calling for democratization. In other news and sort of as we speak now, South Africa is literally ablaze after protests, which began a few days back after the former president, Jacob Zuma, handed himself over to police to serve a 15-month sentence. And what transpired after that was, days of violence and looting of malls, warehouses, industrial areas that is still continuing to this day, and a sort of a level of criminality that hasn't been seen for many years in South Africa. Now I can spend another hour or two talking about the powder keg that is the psyche of people in the region amidst this backdrop of social inequality, growing poverty, COVID, the unemployment bulge, the youth unemployment bulge. But I think what is relevant for our discussion today on the unique aspects of Southern Africa and its political economy of water is that to achieve a level of regionalism, a level of water sharing, water trading, water cooperation beyond the diplomatic, policy, rhetorical levels, I think we need to internalize, the obvious interdependencies that water highlights in the region, and we need champions of change that demonstrate leadership to drive the sort of political transformations needed. Incidentally, we had that level of leadership, I would argue, in the 1990s, perhaps a different kind of leadership, but nonetheless, the level of influence and courage, needed to move at least the water sector forward, the regional water sector forward, and to sort of carry us to a point of reimagining a new vision for water security on the back of political transformations. So I just like to touch on two themes, if I may. One is just a look back and looking particularly at some of these contested spaces. We often think about the Southern African political economy of water as being one of contested interest and norms, specifically that of environment and development interest, environment versus development interest, member state versus donor interests. And then I'd also like to just say something, to look forward on a new regionalism based on, a clear path for SADC. What are these political transformations needed and leadership needed to enable this? And perhaps also, what are the next, and apologies in advance if you see any little kiddies walking around here. Forgive us, it's online schooling again. Now, many of you scholars of water governance will know the South African case. It's widely studied. In fact, I met Naho over 10 years or so ago, right now when we were both PhD students studying the hydropolitics of the Orange Senku River Basin. But just some well-known facts about the region's political economy of water is that we've got this uneven distribution, of water resources in space and time across countries, along with differences in levels of socioeconomic and water infrastructure development between member states, and the challenges, of course, that the impacts of climate change bring, certainly suggest an important role for regional cooperation on the development and management of shared water resources. And also, I think such cooperation is seen as a way to build trust between riparian states, avoiding potential conflicts arising from disputes over shared water resources. Now a few scholars in the region have argued that despite the significant attention that has been given to transboundary water resource management in SADC, the management of shared rivers is not the region's primary water challenge right now. They point out that although many potential water users in the region lack access to sufficient water to meet domestic needs or support their economic activities, this is not the result of physical water scarcity in shared rivers in the region, but rather due to the underdevelopment of the region's existing resources. So, you know, this notion of not so much physical water scarcity, which does exist in many countries, but rather a more dominant notion of economic water scarcity. And linked to this, from a political will perspective, the focus on transboundary water management has, I like to think of it as sort of being like a pendulum swinging back and forth. Right now, the pendulum has swung to the side of meeting domestic water needs, as compared to, say, in the 1990s, where we saw much more activity, focus, political will, policy innovation in transboundary water management. And if we look back, you know, to some of these contested norms and interests that I spoke about earlier, certainly I think from the beginning of developing this regional water, you know, agenda for the region, I think there's been this uneasy compromise between environmental priorities associated with development partners, donor interests. So, for example, you know, putting in place water management strategies, instruments like river basin organizations that have sought to ensure that the water sector adopts this precautionary approach to the environmental dimensions of water resource management, versus the resource development aspirations of SADC member states. Maybe Maria can say more, because she's in that environment from a government perspective rather. But sort of, you know, reflecting this duality, this contestation, if you will, even between development partners and agenda or interest rather of SADC member states. So what we've seen, for example, is, you know, the establishment of river basin organizations, the production of IWRM plans, environmental protection, largely pushed, supported, funded by international donors, particularly European ones. And I think now we see, you know, that has had limited traction and impact, certainly perhaps in creating this kind of dialogue, coordination, maybe dialogue, maybe coordination is a strong word, but what I would argue today is, I think that the regional water agenda in Southern Africa represents a series of compromises between SADC member states and development partners, rather than, you know, a coherent program developing over time. Now thinking about the future, this new regionalism, I think we need to understand regionalism as a process, you know, that drives change of a particular region from relative heterogeneity to increased homogeneity, or perhaps even just coordination. And it's a multi-dimensional one. It includes economic, political, social, cultural aspects that I think should go beyond, you know, the common market idea. But what we see also on that front is that in Southern Africa, certainly since, like I said, the 1990s, the most dynamic regionalization forces that we have found have been in this economic field. Now, I know COVID has hampered, trade through the free trade area, but trade did commence in January 2021. They seem to act a lot quicker than intergovernmental forces, so sort of non-governmental actors. But maybe just and I'll end off now, Naho. I think into the future we will need to really understand what leadership means for the water sector, how and what kind of leadership is needed, one, to manage us through this sort of political transformations that are needed and that society seems to be calling for in the region currently right now, and what that means for the water sector, certainly along these kind of private economic lines. Maybe let me just leave it at that now, and we can always discuss at a later stage. Is that okay?
Great, thank you so much. I think it was a great opening sort of insight into the ways in which water isn't just in its own water box. It's very much connected to the broader political developments. It's also about donors and the various processes that countries engage with these donors. It's also about the economic drivers that are demanding water, that are changing the waterscape. So fantastic overview, I think, has been provided by Inga. Without taking on any questions just now, but please do drop in comments on the chat box. I'm going to move on to Maria. Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much to Alan and Naho for inviting me also to be part of this webinar. I'm also very excited to hear how the conversation is going, and I'm glad Inga went first so she can provide that political view of it all. I'm more from the departmental, from the government side of things, and as you have said, I'm sitting in most of these river basin organizations whose role is to actually implement or institutionalize the whole concept of regionalism at let's say at a transboundary, within the concept of transboundary water resources management. I think Inga has already said most of the stuff, but I can also iterate some of the issues. As we know, the SADC region is a very water scarce region. The development level is different from each of the member states. Some are more developed than the others, and some, when it comes to the water, the infrastructures are more are already there, leaving some still have to develop and leaving not enough water to develop. We can say yes, there is water, but is it all developed? And then you have some basins where are hardly developed, and the issue is, do we want to develop these basins for with large infrastructures, or do we want to keep it pristine, or to keep them pristine for tourism, for example, biodiversity or environmental management? Because within each of these, let's say, basins, each of them have its own nature or its own characteristics. I think everybody knows the Orange River Basin at the moment that is highly developed, and we are still all scrambling for this water. It has a lot of dams, and we are still planning for those dams. Now the question is, who gets that share? That is something that the member states are negotiating. And on top of that, we have these river basin institutions with secretariats whose role is supposed to be administering what the member states are saying, but how effective or the kind of role they have, are they really able to bring the member state together so that at the end of the day, we are not only looking at one project for one member state or project that can be developed for all member states, because we keep talking about benefit sharing. How do we make sure that these benefits are actually shared across the states, not just, we still have that first come, first serve type of system. So those who were there before, or those who are well off, if I may put it like that, economically well off states, they keep developing into a fact that sometimes they don't even inform you. If I don't need a loan from somebody, I'm going to set up my infrastructure. And the last years, the past years, we had a drought in the whole region. I think in the last 5 years, only now we are coming out of it. And you see how each countries, they are now trying to say, to share their plant measures. I need to take so much water from the Zambezi River, for example, or I need to take so much from the Orange River. And at the end of the day, there is no what we call basin sharing agreements. Not all of them has basin sharing agreement, or those, or water use sharing agreement, or those one who have water sharing agreement. They are saying, no, they are not equitable. So how do we do that? So what I would like to say is that within the SADC, we do have the revised SADC protocol on shared water courses, which provides for the establishment of these river basin organization, and whose roles are to promote joint management of these resources. But the question would be, do they have the capacity to really do that without, I don't want to say encroaching on the sovereignty of states, because still the negotiation takes place among states. These institutions, they just provide a platform for members to inform each other. But when they have to negotiate, they kind of come out of the room or out of the RBO structure, and they go and negotiate among themselves. And if I don't like you, I'm like, okay, I can leave you out and just talk to you until we come to a conclusion. By the time we already done the agreement, is when you say, but Maria is also sharing some of this water, or I get to say, but hey, I'm also sharing some of this water. Please bring me in. How do I know that my share is still there? Namibia, unfortunately, is downstream in most of their shared rivers. We always get the short end of this stick, and so we are now negotiating: is it for the users or the environment? And that kind of scenarios will also, it's about how do we share these things. And I think what is now, what we are moving to, is also at the continental level. It's about, we need now to develop for the region. So, and funding is always an issue. The vision is, or each of the states, they want water security. And how do you ensure your water security? You want to at least develop, and then the balance, of course, I think Inga talks about the balance between the environment and the supply itself. Who are we protecting? So within the continent, again, we are more and more getting opportunities to fund projects, but the issue also, you get your donor funders. Are they funding for the project development, or for the project preparation. We have now what we call the Africa Investment Program. It's a new thing which was just established at AMCAO. It's at AMCAO level. It's an opportunity for member states to prepare their project because, as I said, not all countries have enough funding, for example, to prepare for their infrastructure projects. So it's an opportunity also with IPE, with NEPAD, to set aside some funding where member state can either jointly or alone or individually get the funding so they can establish some of the water infrastructure. But as you say, as the politics of things will always come in, and at the end of the day, those who can will do, and those who can't will still be left behind. And I think let me also leave it there so we can continue these discussions. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. What I'm hearing is about the various power dynamics that are going on in the region and the fact that there are these institutions that are being set up, but these institutions need to be understood within this very dynamic set of negotiations, discussions, inclusion and exclusion that's happening between states. So it's very interesting to hear, and also the developments at AMCAO and NEPAD for me are quite interesting to hear how these will also fit into this new regionalism that's emerging or trying to emerge, I think. So yeah, fantastic set of opening remarks from the two speakers. I now invite you, if you haven't already done so, start putting in your comments, thoughts, questions into the chat function. I know there's a couple that's come along, but if you would also like to ask questions verbally, feel free to raise your hand, turn on your camera, and we will get to you for sure. But yes, Alan, do you want to kick us off with some of your comments? I think you've put in a few.
Yeah, thanks, Naho. I mean, I put in a couple of points as Inga was speaking. So many thoughts were being triggered in my mind, you know, and you as well, Maria, also continued to trigger my thinking. So, you know, we're talking about different actors. We have the sort of donor financing community, but as you say, there's also domestic financing, the political constituencies of governments, but also the people, in a sense, the complexities of demands for resources and development. I just wondered if a couple of thoughts, you know, firstly, you know, this disconnect, I mean, you'd think that the notion of regionalism would be fairly easy for everyone to grasp, and there would be a certain set of development pathways that people would want to follow. But it seems in a way that in spite of these protocols, etc., the notion of sort of supranational development of basins hasn't really caught on. So is there a problem with the notion of regionalism in a sense? Is it as I think Naho just slipped in, is there a need for a new regionalism, a sort of new way of thinking about these transboundary management issues? That's one quick question. But also, is there a is there a challenge here in terms of the role changing of these kind of external actors, whether it's SIWA or, you know, other external funding or multilateral development banks? Is there a changing nature of their role in the region? A couple of thoughts from me, and then we have some really good questions in the chat we can come to.
Inga or Maria, do you want to react to Alan's thoughts initially? Oh, Inga, I think you're muted.
Sorry, thanks. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Ellen. That's really great insights, and I see also quite a lot coming through the chat. That's great. In fact, I think it is also one of the last comments by sorry, Deb, I think it is also asking around international organizations and, you know, how, for instance, the World Bank and what role they're playing. Certainly from my experience, I see international development partners taking on a sort of a coordination role almost, or at least trying to, you know, sort of recognizing, and I see that a lot in the drought resilience space, this need for institutional coordination or policy coherence. And so trying to at least bring the international donor community, you know, together around that. So for example, the World Bank SADRI, the Southern Africa Drought Resilience Initiative, you know, is trying to do that. SADRI is a World Bank initiative. Yeah, I think that, and maybe I'm being controversial here, but I think it comes perhaps at the absence of that convening role that in many ways SADC should be playing, SADC Secretariat at least. So what we see right now is, I think SADC has, and you know, for those who don't know, SADC is the regional economic community in Southern Africa. I think they've certainly played a part in, you know, helping to create awareness or to help build capacity of some of these organizations like river basin organizations, facilitating dialogue. But yeah, as Maria mentioned, you know, the water sharing agreements, you know, or the lack thereof, is something that for me is quite telling. You know, moving us beyond that, you know, that engagement and dialogue. And I think we've known this for some time. I mean, we often talk about this, you know, the kind of the fact that river basin organizations or other institutions, water institutions in the region, they don't have that, you know, they don't have a stick, because the mandate for water management is still held by sovereign states. And yeah, you know, like I said, with the pendulum shift, the pendulum swinging back, the focus right now is on meeting domestic need, domestic demand. It's interesting. I think it was
Inga, yeah, just look at Miranda's comment. No, look at Miranda's comment on that point, the pendulum point, you know, because she mentions, is it more about the economics of water or remaining in power? You mentioned the protests in Eswatini and in South Africa right now. What do you think about her point?
Yeah, and certainly I would think that plays out in some countries, but also, you know, I mean, we've now got the benefit of hindsight of the 1990s, where I think we had a special environment there. You know, we were students at the time, and listening to, Maria knows people like Pete Haynes. I think now you also know him, very sort of influential figure at the time, you know, for Namibia, in helping to craft that SADC water protocol and sort of pushing for that the change, the policy change at the time. And I think it also came at a time when not only in the water space, but, you know, the region was opening up. Multilateralism was encouraged across sectors. So there was this, you know, it was at the time, there was something about the window of opportunity there that, you know, I think created this wonderful foundation for multilateral engagement, which perhaps we don't necessarily have now. So I wouldn't only say it's about sort of political self-interest right now. It could play a role, but yeah, there was something about the 90s that had that element.
I'm just wondering, Naho, whether we could ask Mohsin to verbalize his question to Maria, perhaps. Mohsin, would you mind? You have it in the chat, but maybe you'd like to speak to the audience.
Hi, everyone. Just, I'm actually trying to cook actually my lunch as well. So,
Multitasker.
so yeah. So thank you very much for presentation. Actually, my question is much more because I heard. I mean, you talked about the challenges related to developments or the ambitions for having development in perhaps each country they have and is struggling for the national political challenges that they have. So basically, my question is that what do you think this current pattern of regionalism or lack of regionalism actually will finally at the end of the day come over the nationalism in this region, and basically what do you think about the benefits of this regionalism or lack of that? Who is much more benefit from this? Is it a specific state in this region that much more benefit from this pattern, or any external actor that may be in favor of this regionalism? Yep. I hope I really clarify my question. Thank you.
Maria, would you like to tackle that one?
Yes, thanks for the question. You have to remember, I think SADC region is fairly new, if I may. We are the youngest, if I may say. And if you look at all the SADC treaty, for example, the whole issue is about we want regional integration. But what are the key, what do we use to become integrated? And water is one of them. That's why we talk about the SADC protocol, the revised SADC protocol on shared water courses. It's about how do you foster cooperation at that level. That's why you establish this river basin organization. But at the beginning, we were still looking at what is the basin made up of? What are the resources in these basins? If you look at, I was looking at their website of all of them. Basically, the issue is like water resources management, which is I would say it's an easy thing to do. We all want to manage our resources, but for what? Until it's time to say, okay, now we know that these resources are there to be managed. How do we develop and manage accordingly? And again, how do we strengthen these institutions such that both national and regional people are happy going on or using the instruments which are created within the basin, for example. And again, the issue that we talk about harmonizing the policies. Currently, I think the good thing is, for example, okay, I can say the orange because I sit there a whole lot. You have 4 member states, and at least our policies are closer to each other. So we can say, okay, we even sometimes use the same monitoring equipment. So if you have to talk about management, you can say, okay, our policies are closer to each other. Even our instruments are closer to each other. How do we now then agree to say, let's allow the secretariat, for example, the Orasecom secretariat, let's give them the power to carry out some of these, because currently the way they do, they are mainly just coordinators and facilitators. But if we can agree as member states to say, this is our institution, let us strengthen it, empower it, such that it can carry out some of the activities that we can do at the national level. Most of these secretariats, we are saying they must do this work, but they don't even have the budget, for example. That's why you have then the donor or the ICP that comes in and say, this is the loophole. I can bring in, I'm not sure, I don't want to say my influences, I can bring in something, but some of these are not really hardcore type of cooperation, but they help to go to that. Like if you know how to manage your water, what is available, then you can say, okay, I'm able to develop a certain amount such that it's enough for all of us. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but it's about, are we willing to give up our sovereignty? To what level are we able, do we want to do that?
And maybe that
It has to come from the
yeah, I think, Maria, what that does is point us to this point about economies as well, you know, and as you kind of said at the beginning there, maybe the starting point being water under these SADC protocols, etc. Maybe increasingly that's not the best entry point for managing water. I remember Mike Muller once talking about the problem with IWM is it doesn't have development in the title or something like that. You know, I mean, it's that development issue, and that's what Michelle has mentioned here. Michelle, I wonder if you're online, do you want to verbalize your question, which I think is a great one, which puts jobs really at the center of this this big challenge. Hi.
Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle Heasterman from the Water Research Commission. Thanks very much, Ellen, and thanks to the speakers. Yeah, I'd put it, you know, job creation can be seen as quite simplistic. And I think that there's good and bad ways to really engage with people on that. I think you have to really be strong in a social justice element to that, sustainable livelihoods, jobs, and not just a number counting exercise, which we're seeing in some of the catchment work that we're doing as being quite limited in what this means in the long term. But I see it even more now than ever before that this is kind of when we enter into just those first establishing relationships where you're trying to show, come work with us on this. This is what you can gain. This is the value proposition. It's often job creation is that's what people want to hear. And I've seen it in municipalities and in the private sector, but there also are other elements, but I just see it as becoming incredibly dominant in the conversation. And rightfully so. I mean, we have absolutely terrifying unemployment figures and especially in youth unemployment. And hence that's also where some of the investment efforts are going towards is around youth work experience, our presidential economic stimulus package, which has been released in South Africa. But I'm really curious to hear how, especially now after with COVID, I'm curious on how that is in other countries in the SADC region, and if that is the dominant focus. And I'm completely generalizing, it's not all stakeholders that we're engaging with, but it is quite important. And coming across in our as we try and express, you know, I'm also working with a lot of ecological scientists who are learning to speak value to diverse sectors. But I'm curious about what that is like in outside of the country, because I think that we do need to have more sharing and learning across that to know what is value to different stakeholders. So and I'm not as familiar with the situation in the other countries. So a curiosity.
Thanks, Inga or Maria. Would you like to comment on that? Or anyone else, indeed, who's from the region or beyond the region? Key point.
If I may, you look at the different levels. Governments, they negotiate for water use, which get used by the industries, by the key stakeholders. That's why at most of these basin level organizations, they have the component of stakeholder participation, if I may say, where because Orange River, the farmer should be able to tell me how much water are they using, which in most cases they don't. You tell them, I'm giving you a permit and you need to be able to tell me that you are using that. So when I go and negotiate for that water, I get input, then the jobs can be created, if I may put it like that. But I need their input also. But the government level, we have a different role than the stakeholder themselves. But at the end of the day, there is that harmony between the two. We negotiate for the users.
Thanks, Maria. Naho, back to you.
Yeah, I'm hearing some really interesting things. So first of all, there are these real grounded domestic drivers, such as job creation and sort of satisfying the demands in the political landscape within each country. But then at the same time, you have this other international regional layer, which is very much about ownership of institutions. How do you really own institutions, and how does that link to sovereignty? How does it impinge on sovereignty? I'm sure there's some lawyers in this room, but lawyers would say it's not necessarily about an erosion of sovereignty. Others who take more political science perspective would say indeed there is some sort of compromise that needs to be made, and all of these are incongruent. There are things that have to be together, but they don't necessarily fit well in a. It's really fantastic to hear these challenges. And one of the things that I'm starting to think is, well, what then is the alternative? What's the alternative to regionalism if it's incongruent, if it's very, very difficult to do, if we lack the leadership, if it's something that works for a couple of years when there's a good window of opportunity available, but then the next stages of regionalism is very challenging for whatever reasons, some external reasons like COVID, like you couldn't have, SADC couldn't have control for that. So what then is the alternative in these situations? And I'm struggling. It's hard to say that I can see these countries being able to come up with an alternative. So yeah, it's really interesting to think through these. I'm gonna call on the audience to see if there are any further comments, thoughts that have been emerging in your heads that you may not have yet put in the chat, but you're more than welcome to speak. Are there hands that want to go up on and ask a question?
Miranda.
Hi, yes, it's me. Hi, thank you so much for both presentations. It was really good. And I'm from Brazil, and one of the things that we find there that I don't know if it's maybe being common with your region is that usually politicians, when they talk about creating regional institutions, they say that because water is a national resource and it's so important for Brazil, they don't want to give the power to these institutions to decide anything. So this create kind of conflict, and it can also impede cooperation. And I would like to know if it's not only about the sovereignty, the political sovereignty, but if you also find this discourse in your region about, yes, water is very important to us because it's a national resource that we need. So we cannot give power to institutions about it and over it.
Yeah, maybe I can start off. I think definitely, Miranda, you see that in some countries, I think, and I think I should say that there is another added nuance in Southern Africa because of the upstream, downstream, the hegemonic kind of role that South Africa also plays, so certainly for South Africa, I mean, being such a a big player in the region. You know, very much water is the National Department of Water and Sanitation is the custodian of water, right? And that is sort of the view, the state-centric view. But I mean, Maria can speak more. But where you have countries where there's a greater physical scarcity, but also a vulnerability because of being maybe more downstream, I think, you know, there's a very different position, very different sentiment, because I mean, there's a greater need to cooperate, a greater need to collaborate, and yeah, I think maybe Maria, I don't know if I don't want to speak on behalf of Namibia, but yeah, you'll be able to add more.
Yes, I'm just thinking, with any institution, it takes a while to get to that common understanding. And I don't think that these regional institutions, let's say window dressing, it's just that it takes a while. If you take them away, I think more chaos, I don't know how to put it, you would have more chaos because you wouldn't even know what's happening. You find yourself with, let's say your water levels are low, and if you don't have that platform to call and say, what's happening from your end, then you will be basically caught in the dark. So as long as you are sharing the resources, it's always best to cooperate. But how do we strengthen these institutions? I mean, we go to the level of the ministers. You have the static water divisions, and within that, I keep referring to the protocol because it's currently what we have as a region. The ministers do come together, and they are the ones supposed to make this decision. But maybe it's bigger, like and then you have the summit, the heads of state. They discuss issues of regional integration, and what you would think, as much as is the key to the economic development, it's also, I feel, is a key to cooperation. If you can cooperate on that, you can surely still say, I'm trying to find a better word for it. I mean, if you can share a cup of water, you could say, you can already say, let me give up some of my power, maybe not so much. Instead of giving up your power, bring in within the River Basin Organization, bring in some government people. Okay, now I'm talking from the government point of view, but people who has also a tie to the government, to say, especially the budget is a issue in the whole implementation of these planning processes within the country. So if you can, instead of just having water people in this, bring in some finance people, some people from planning commission people, and then as you engage, you realize that, you know, you don't necessarily have to be taking away other people's share. You are just trying to see how do you develop your equitable share from whatever is there. But of course, you get the big brothers who would always say, yeah, don't worry, I'll do it for you. It can come in the form of some member states, or it can come in the form of the donors. And if you don't put your foot down, you may end up just being told what to do. By the time you realize, oh, I also have a say, it could be a bit too late. But capacity is also very important. So I feel these institutions are important. We just need to trust into them. At least give them some power that you can not step on the sovereignty of your state, but still can contribute towards what the goal is, water security, if that's what we want to be as a region.
Thanks, Maria. I just want to jump in, and I think we have a few minutes left, but I mean, I hear this narrative banging around my head about water for growth and development. You remember that, Inga? I think South Africa, and probably Michelle, you remember the South African Water for Growth and Development strategy, right? Which was developed, I think put the economic development of South Africa very much at the center of water resource management. So maybe SADC needs something along those lines, Maria, something that reinvigorates the narrative, kind of reminds everyone, why are we trying to do this? You know, there is the economic development aspect, there is the jobs aspect, the growth aspect, protection of key natural resources, etc. But certainly places dead center the concerns of the majority of the population in the region, just jobs, livelihood, security. So maybe there is something there that needs to be reinvigorated, the sort of narrative of regionalism that is recast for the second quarter of the 21st century. I don't know. Some final thoughts from my side anyway. Naho, back to you.
Yeah,
and
no,
back to Inga and Maria.
Yeah, no, these are really interesting ideas. And it, you know, Maria's point seemed to me as though it was growing pains, like the institutions are trying to move on to the next stage or the next phase of their institutional development and process. And it's a little bit of growing pains that you need to be patient, you need to put trust in it, you need to allow for it to develop in a way that works for these partners, and capacity is important as a result. You need to continually invest in their capacity so that states can take ownership and make the institutions what they should be, rather than, you know, having a top-down or externally imposed one. But there are some other things that sort of flick through my mind when I start thinking about this. When we start thinking about the drivers, I mean, we haven't really talked about the mining sector, for example. We haven't really talked about large-scale land acquisitions that are going on in the region that are driven by investors that are going to be developing agricultural schemes, etc. There's also new dams that are being planned. There's also issues around environmental flows, water for the environment. So if we also put all of these into the picture, it becomes really challenging. And as we move forward with climate change implications, with the uncertainty in the ways in which population, agriculture, industrial growth happen, it seems as though the institutions also need to be capable of being flexible. And that's something I haven't yet really heard in the discussions. And maybe this is something that you know, would be interesting to explore. My experience in other regions is that institutions, once they set up, they're very much set in stone. It's very difficult to embed that flexibility. These kind of small changes are very difficult to come by. And the institutions quite often are a relic of their time, and they don't get updated. And in many ways, you could say then maybe the SADC region is actually not trying to get stuck in that same problem of becoming a relic of their time and you know, having these growing pains. But also it'll be interesting to hear what other regions have tried to do to continue with this capacity to embed flexibility, to think about the power dynamics ultimately that underlie all of this. Yes, I see some more comments that are coming in on the chat, but perhaps I will give the last words to Inga and Maria if they have any final thoughts, any comments that you would like to put in before we need to close.
I have one, because we're talking about climate change, water scarcity. I think we are also adding to the whole water balance, the issue of desalinating water for different purposes is now coming in. Already Namibia is looking at using seawater desalination instead of just getting concentrated on the, because we don't have any other source except for the shared waters. And the Namibia is already also in discussion with Botswana, because we share also, I think, 3 or 4 river basin with them, instead of bringing in more water in the balance, not only concentrate on what you have. And currently they're saying sea water will be there. It's kind of a pool where if you want water security, is a way to go. So we now had to balance our water we have among all our growth. If we don't have it, you must add to it, and we see how we take it, and we go beyond, not so much beyond the basin, but you can go beyond the basin. Already there are these interbasin transfer taking place, but now you can bring in other, not only from the fresh water, but you can bring in from the seawater.
Great point. So talking about new water, as many other places have done through technology, through different kinds of water reallocation plans. Excellent point. Thank you so much, Maria. Inga, do you have any final comments, thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Naho, and thank you, everybody. Also, very, very rich discussion. I think just from my side, where we do see opportunity, right, for sort of reimagining a new regionalism, I would say is in the space of information, right? Evidence to inform this kind of water sharing. And I think it's a space that is moving quite quickly, and there is of course, for me as a researcher, it's interesting because it's also, you know, evidence and science that drives this agenda, but it's also needed if we look at, you know, what's happening in the disaster management space and the climate information services space, and how we're enhancing delivery of climate information to build this kind of climate resilience, and also how water fits into that, you know, monitoring, data sharing. Then I think there's lots of strides. So reimagining a regionalism based on this kind of shared information, shared data sharing. My colleague Patience was on the, I think she's still here, yeah, who works in that space in the region, you know, developing data sharing protocols and mechanisms. And I think that's an exciting opportunity. But again, I think, Maria, you also mentioned sort of moving beyond water, you know, so it really needs this kind of beyond water thinking to disaster management, climate change, agriculture. And it's yeah, I think there is opportunity there, that institutions, water institutions, both need and can be, you know, flexible in building into their operations. But yeah, I leave it at that. Thank you, Naho.
Thank you so much. Another interesting point, an important point about data and information sharing. It's seen as one of the key, you know, building blocks for institutions. And so it'll be interesting to see how that becomes the vehicle for flexibility and being able to adapt to these uncertainties that come along. We've just gone over the hour, so we really have to wrap up now, even though I would love for the conversation to continue for at least another 30 minutes or more. But what we're going to do is, first of all, thank our two speakers. You will, if this was in a real room, you would have heard our clapping, but please be assured that there's a lot of virtual clapping going on the screens. I really appreciated you sharing your thoughts as well as your time. It's really rich to hear from people who are working on this on the ground and who see the realities of how to break deadlock of negotiations, why institutions seem to be very difficult to move forward when there are these multiple political, economic, social factors that are happening constantly. So I thought it was a very insightful and valuable set of talks that we had, and fantastic set of questions from the audience as well. We'll be taking a short break over our summer period. So in the next coming weeks, we'll be pausing our webinar series, but we'll be back in full swing come September, and we'll be announcing further episodes. So please do join us. If you've missed any of our webinars in the past, we now have a website running. So Valentine will put in the web address in the chat box. So you're welcome to take a look at our 3 previous episodes, which have been recorded. We also have PDFs of the reports as well, so you can download and take a look at them. We'll be continuing to add more material to the website, so I'd be open to hearing your thoughts about this. And for those of you who are in the right time zone, this evening there is going to be a documentary series that's going to be live streamed, and I believe Alan has put in the link towards a link for that. So do take a look at some of the issues that are coming out from the UK about rivers, the undervaluing of rivers here in the UK. And it'll be a very interesting moment for us to reflect on that as well. Alan, anything that I've forgotten to mention before I close?
Nothing at all. I just want to add my thanks to everyone, particularly our 2 speakers, Inga and Maria, and to everyone else for their good questions. See you soon.
All right, thanks everyone,
Yes.
and have a good break. Bye-bye.